Hi everyone, I'm just going to brew you coffee as we talk. Company name, Badger and Dodo, we get which one's the Badger, which one's the Dodo, you know, a lot of that going on. So I'm the Badger is what I say, Brock is Irish for Badger. Dodo is my father-in-law. I can pass this around if you like. There's a little bit of a showdown of our staff and who's who. Dodo we call MacGyver. He's the father-in-law. He does a lot of stuff around the place for us, and he was in Moore Park basically as a scientist. Married his daughter and we moved back here in 2008, and I built the roastery in his, at that time they were empty chicken sheds, and literally I remember walking in there one day and looking down on the floor and there's straw all over the ground and a very foul smell about the place. And we built a roastery there. We put a concrete wall up, still remember laying the blocks for that, and it was the size of this room, not even, it's actually maybe that wide. And to fit the roaster in, we took the ceiling up to the pitch of the roof so the roaster would fit in. And we bought a 1 kilo and a 10 kilo roaster, and we just started roasting coffee. Backstory to that was that I gave my story away. I used to be an accountant, and some people say still am an accountant, but failed miserably and got sacked and went from job to job. You know, you do this degree in whatever you're supposed to do at the end of school, and I did that and I didn't make it. Nothing against accountants, by the way. Actually, a lot of admiration for them for doing what they do, but I was no good at it. So I thought, well, I've got to do something. Chinese politics sounds pretty good, so I did that. And whilst I was fortunate I did do that, because whilst I did do that I needed to pay my way through university and started working as a barista, and that got me to where I am now, and that was in 1993. Travelled around the world, you know, as you Aussies do, we go travelling, and I ended up in Ireland, and I thought, wow, there's a very rudimentary coffee culture going on here. Let's marry a local girl and come back here and do a good job of it. And it kind of happened that way. We found ourselves back here, went back to Australia, back to Melbourne, and learnt about, just delved more into the coffee scene. Melbourne is a fantastic coffee scene. Why? Melbourne, how does that happen, you know? And this is actually something I want to talk about, is the successive waves in roasting. A lot of people go, you know, Italian coffee is great, you know, and it is, it's great, you know, and we've got a lot to thank the Italians for. Coffee come from Ethiopia, it's a very short journey to Italy. Italians in the Industrial Revolution invented machines that can make coffee. And so it slotted straight into their lifestyle. And World War II, Italians moved to Australia to take them espresso machines. Australians go, well, that's nice, but let's put some milk with it, you know. Let's refine how it's done with milk. And the same happened in America as well. And so that's what we'd say first wave coffee is. Second wave would be like Starbucks. They go, well, there's two types of coffee beans, Robusta and Arabica. So Arabica's, it's a more refined coffee. Robusta is very robust, it's very full on, you know. Twice the amount of caffeine for those of you that don't know. And spill the beans. But they didn't really know, if you go into what is jokingly called a Charbucks, very dark roasted coffee, and we've all talked about this, we've all talked the same language here tonight. A lighter roasted coffee is going to be true to origin. Dark roasted coffee bean is just taking on the profile of the degree of roasting. You lose the natural body acidity flavours in the coffee, and all the oils come to the outside. Look, I have to admit, it's not bad when you put 10 sugars with it, you know. Sweet and sour is a very worldwide, from sweet and sour pork in Asia to sticky sweet Canotto or Amaretto in Italy, to a sweet and sour kind of thing with the coffee. It's a flavour combination that works, but we don't always want to put sugar with our coffee. Anyway, so that's second wave. Third wave is then where we go, well, hang on, let's just not burn the hell out of our coffee, hey. You know, there's some diabetes here, diabetics amongst us, and we can't all put sugar with it. And there's a lot more to get out of coffee. We sort of touched on the comparisons between, say, coffee and wine. 400 compounds in wine, 1,000 in coffee. Coffee is, like, I'm blown away sometimes by the amount of complexities that coffee has in the making of it at the moment. With the most, I'm sort of digressing a bit here, but if we look at the most modern sort of pressure profiling espresso machines that come out at the moment, the taste combinations are endless. Anyway, so where was I? Back to the back. Yeah. So that's
towards the third wave.
Three waves of coffee. You can even say fourth wave at the moment, which is, say, like people that live in America who can just, well, let's just get in the van and drive down to Central America and pick some coffee beans and throw them in the back of the van. It's very direct trade. Direct trade's another word which is bandied around everywhere in the coffee industry, along with speciality coffee, direct trade. You know, is it going out to origin yourself and collecting the coffee, or is it getting a broker to go to your farm, or a particular farm that you like, and you establish a relationship directly with those farmers? You know, how direct is direct trade? I've got to grind this if you want coffee. Excuse me one second. One of the golden rules of coffee: grind your coffee fresh. So they're the waves of coffee. I guess going back to finish off my own back end of the story there in Melbourne, and digressing onto the waves of coffees with the Italians. I stayed there until about 2008, moved back to Ireland and set up the roastery then and set up the business. And it really went pretty quickly for me, to be honest. Three things make good quality coffee in a cafe, and this is one thing I still say to this day: beans, machines, baristas. We didn't have much of a choice over who would sell us coffee machines, and we used one particular brand there. I'm really going to try to remain nameless about that brand of espresso machine providers today. They were good to us at the start, but you know, there's a lot of advancement in machine technology at the moment. It's outstanding what's going on, and for us as a company moving ahead, it's knowing the machine that is in situation in a customer's cafe, and the dramatic difference something like temperature can make. But what I focused on in the very early days, and where I saw a good gap in the market, was baristas. And I started off very early on judging for the Barista Championships, and then working with baristas to ensure that our coffee was made properly. And even to this day, we have a 3 strikes approach. So if we get a complaint about a coffee in a particular cafe, I take it back to the owner and I say, listen guys, just passing on a complaint. Can we check what's going on in your place? You know, do you need some help? All right, we'll try and fix that problem. Some people really don't like you saying that to them, you know, which is very telling about the customer. If that happens 3 times, then you're out. We don't want you serving our coffee. It's tough love, but it's, you know, we just want good quality coffee. And 6 times we have taken our coffee from cafes because they're really after the brand or the name. We've got nice branding with our cups and our bags, so it's a bit of a telltale sign for us. Oh yeah, we're looking for your coffee, we want to get all the signage, all the logo, and we'll pay you all for it. Yeah, great. How's your baristas? What are your barista skills like? You know, what sort of machine are you using? Another sign for us is I'm opening up a coffee shop next week. Can you give us some coffee? All right, great. You've got some baristas on hand. Great. Okay, great. Have you got a machine? No, I haven't. What's your budget? Oh, 3,000 euros. They spent 20 grand on the wallpaper. Which, you know, Yeah, and then they've got the coffee machine is the heart of the business, you know, and you know, and $3,000 on a coffee machine is not going to cut it, you know. Well, I've got grinders that are worth $2,500, you know. So, yeah, the thing that I see at the moment for people wanting to get ahead, yeah, obviously baristas is almost old hat now. You've got to have a good barista. You've got to have good beans. Well, that's up to your own personal choice, but you've got to have a good machine. And machines is where we're finding it's letting things down. Coffee industry is very dynamic. It will always change, and the moment you think you know everything is the moment you're going to lose or you're going to slip. And that's one thing I saw a change in Australia. I grew up in a rural town. I saw big bubbly cappuccinos, really hot milk, and I saw that in country towns. But you go to the city and the milk's at 60 degrees, it hasn't been burnt, it's soft and it's velvety, and you can really taste the coffee. But country towns now in Australia, you won't see that as much. You still will, but you won't see it as much. So, it does, just coming back to some of the questions that Keith was saying he wanted me to touch on, how do we give support to our customers who are all over the country? Now, when I say 150, there'd be a good few of those just selling the bags of coffee. Do you know, say delis, and they sell someone else's coffee, they've got a relationship with them, fair enough, but they just want to sell our bags of coffee. It does get hard in the rural areas. This is my Dublin account manager, Aaron, over here. He has taken a huge weight off my shoulder by looking after Dublin for me. I mean, he himself is a pretty well accomplished barista. He's pretty good on the skills there, but it's also about getting. So what Aaron's doing at the moment is going around and he's retraining all our accounts, and we're giving free training to those accounts using Vinny. Ferg touched on Vinny before. Vinny is a fantastic barista. I think for the last 3 or 4 years he's been in the top 6 in the Irish Barista Championships. He's back again this year. I roasted up a coffee there for him last week and he's through. Vinny is also what you call a Q grader. He's the only Q grader in Ireland. He's an AST, which is an Authorised Specialty Coffee Association of Europe trainer. I mean, it's like he's done his degree in coffee and he's done his masters in teaching. That's a way to describe that. But then he's a Q grader. And fair dues to the fellow, you know, for this, because he's the only Q grader in Ireland. What's a Q grader? A sommelier for wine. You would know what a sommelier is. A Q grader is the equivalent for coffee. But to be a Q grader is you really
have to be able to blind taste test coffees and be able to tell the person testing you where the origin of the coffee.
Yeah. So yeah, you have to be
the altitude of the coffee. It's
which side of the mountain it's growing on. And, it's almost like that.
Was picked. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So so Vinny does our training in Dublin. Country areas, that's hard. You know, I've got a customer up there in Kilkenny at the moment. Fair dues to him. He came all the way down to Cork to the roastery to do some training initially. He keeps himself up to date. Last weekend he just popped his head up there at we're up at the Dublin Coffee Festival, and there he is. You know, he's keeping in the loop of what's happening in the coffee industry. Consistency. Yeah, how do we keep consistency with roasting so much coffee? Well, in that picture that's going around there somewhere, there's a picture of our orange roaster. That's a 30 kilo solid cast iron roaster with, it roasts purely on hot air, nothing else. It does have a kind of rolling heat that's kept in the cast iron, attached to this roaster we've got what's called a profiling system. So the profiling system ensures, so basically we put the coffee into the roaster, we roast it and we record the profile. We record how it rises in temperature over time, and we like it, So say if we don't like it, we go, okay, we'll just maybe take the heat off a little bit at this stage here, or increase the airflow, and then we record that, cup it, taste it, and refine it over time. And when we've got it right, then it's just a matter of throwing it into the roaster, pressing the button, away we go. I mean, you do have to stay around. There are environmental conditions that make it. Sometimes the wind might be blowing against the chimney, and there's not as much smoke getting out, and it doesn't burn as fast. The flame doesn't burn as good, or so you have to be there to sort of increase the heat a little bit if it's not making it its own way. So consistency, number one there. Number two is when we buy coffee, we buy large amounts of it to get us through 6 months period. If coffee cropping twice a year, then we can get it from both those crops. It does mean buying a lot of coffee, and if you're a customer, I'm going to come chasing you for money around that time of the year, because the amount of coffee we buy is kind of insane. And we should be actually going out to Origin and looking at bringing back container loads ourselves. But the logistics of that are quite huge. May I impose on you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, true.
I haven't got a hell of a lot of cups. I came prepared with everything else. So if there's couples, you might slurp out of the same cup together. And if we get halfway through that, I'll brew another lot. If you use that, I'll brew another lot. So this coffee here is from Burundi. It's next to Rwanda. Rwanda is coming into season now. Panama, Nicaragua, Burundi. Now, unlike these guys here, or I don't know, well, Ferg uses an excellent green bean saucer, as he said, and fair dues to Ferg for that. And he says the same with Nordic approach. And Jennifer's explained where she's getting her coffee from. We use brokers all over the place, to be honest. For our main Blackwater and Red Rock blends that give consistency, we source by 2 particular brokers. And again, that's in the name of consistency. Consistency is king is one of the words that has always been bandied about in coffee as well. Hence our efforts with the roast profiler and buying large crops, large amounts from the same crop. For fun, then we go out and we get coffee from different origins and different brokers. And this one at the moment is from a group called 3-2 Cup. It's a very daggy Hanon Retriever cup. Burunda Rukungir 100% red bourbon. It's fully washed. So when coffee's processed, it's basically put into a. It's got to be processed, so it can be fully washed, or it can be basically laid out on the ground and let dry. Sometimes with the cherry on, sometimes with the mucilage on. There's different ways of then drying it and getting into your relevant 12% moisture content. This coffee's from a washing station. I'm not even going to pronounce that 26-letter word of the washing station near Rukungir, but so what that is a washing station. What we have here is a lot of farmers, particularly in the Rwandan area and Burundi, they've got a hectare, and that's all they own. They grow their coffee on that, and there can be thousands of little farmers around this area. They bring their own coffee into that washing station. It's all processed and thrown in together, and that's where that coffee comes from. As opposed to, say, like a particular farm, say like in Brazil, massive big farms, they've got these things that look like tractors on stilts that go around and bristle the bushes and get all the cherries off them, and this is a very different say situation to that. Sweet, fresh acidity with blueberries and lemon, perfect for home brewing, and a milky espresso based drink. So yeah, I'm finding the acidity in this is pretty well pronounced. Certainly good lemon. Now, just as a map of the tongue goes, for those of you who would like to sort of understand coffee and tasting a bit more, so sweetness is at the front, acidity is obviously along the sides, sourness is under the tongue, bitterness is more towards the back of the throat, body is like a viscosity that you feel over the roof of your mouth, and then just search yourself for the flavours. One thing that I find is good in coffee is less is more. Do I need to brew more?
I'd say so.
Yep. Less is more. So when using, say, something like the AeroPress, people are throwing 20 grams and and they think that they want a stronger coffee and they're just pushing it more and more. But definitely with coffee, less is more. If you roast it more, you're going to get burnt bitter taste. If you put too much coffee, think about it at making a cup of tea. If you put a tea bag into the cup of tea and you leave it there for too long, it's going to end up bitter. If you leave it there long enough, it's going to be too weak. I think Ferg was talking about recipes there before. It's dead true. You've got to have recipes for whatever you make. Pass that around if you like. The AeroPress. So what we've got is different brewing devices, and different, like the AeroPress is the logistics and how an AeroPress works is it's brilliant. But everything brings its own characteristics and what it's pulling out of the coffee. And home brewing is something I like to talk about. On the back of our bags, we talk about when you go to make coffee, make sure you weigh it. It's really important. You've got to get that recipe right. The difference between 15 grams in an AeroPress and 16 grams in an AeroPress, and the same as Ferg in his cafe, when you're making a cup of coffee, it can actually work out to be a fair percentage. If you accidentally put in 18 grams instead of 15, what percentage is that? It's a fairly decent extra percentage. Excuse me a second while I grind and think of some questions. So I might as well talk you through this as I'm going through. So what I'm brewing here is half a litre. So the magical number to remember when you're brewing coffee or making coffee is 60 grams of coffee per litre. So brewing half a litre of coffee, I'm using 30 grams of coffee. Just washing the filter to get rid of any sort of paper residuals. Also doubles as a preheating / washing. The AeroPress. I've ground it coarse enough so that the coffee will run through within about a minute and a half. Again, less is more. Some people, if you want to make it stronger, just put more coffee in. And be subtle about your. Try to judge the differences. If you instead of say 30 grams, put in 35 next time, and just try the difference. Now, one thing, we have got a temperature probe here to measure temperature, but manufacturer of the AeroPress recommends 80 degrees, which I think is fairly cold. But it's better than, say, 96 degrees, or certainly better than 100. Heat generally destroys a lot of flavour and taste in coffee. And then just think about what it is you're doing when you go to make your coffee. Okay, so just for the exercise, I'm going to take the temperature here and we'll see. And I remember doing a coffee tasting demonstration for a customer in Limerick at a place called Canteen that we supply, and we just did a brewing there, and the difference in temperature was 5 degrees, and we were using a Rwandan at the time, and I was astounded at the difference in taste. So We're really at just under 80 degrees here at this. Let's give this a go. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to, when I pour, just going to make sure, you know, like if I poured this straight up against the side, obviously the water would just go through and you just get a disproportionate amount of water hitting into the vessel. So just letting it bloom a bit here at the moment to release some of the gases. And I should have my stopwatch going. Add 10 seconds to this.
When I was first exposed to coffee geekiness, it was Brock and Carl, who I suspect is marginally geekier from Coffee Angel. And there was a plethora of scales and apps and probes, and I couldn't for the life of me get my head around it. First time I'd ever seen it was a couple of years ago during Save Kilkenny. And I've slowly gotten used to it, but I can never quite bridge the gap between that and how I make coffee at home. So just not quite as precise, shall we say.
Well, okay, so what Carl introduced you to that year was a refractometer. I remember that. A refractometer measures the amount of total dissolved solids in the coffee. And actually our very own Marco Beverages here, guys, you should be really proud of this company. As an Irish company, these guys have done so much for the world of coffee, it's not funny. Their amount of research that they've done into, you're going around to all the coffee spectrums around the world, or coffee festivals around the world, taking people's opinions about how do you like it, and it's all based on opinion. It's not like some sort of doctrine or mandate handed down from heaven. It's based on genuine preferences.
And what does that business do, Brock?
So Marco are hot water boiler makers. In a sense, if you go to a service station and you go get a cup of coffee from Bean the Cup machine, or you just top it up with a bit of hot water, you see Marco written above it. But they've got very precise ways of delivering hot water, right down to the 10th of a degree. And that sort of thing matters for specialty coffee bars. And we're talking about a hot water boiler with scales and a drain built into it that would cost you $5 grand, including that, just for essentially a teapot and a set of scales, you know. But based in Sandford, industrial estate in Dublin, and really leading the field in the specialty coffee market around the world, you know. Thank you very much.
So I have a question for you, if that's okay. It's actually more directed at Ferg, the shop. How practical is it to serve coffee or brew coffee any other way than use an espresso machine in your shop? Like, could you serve filter coffee and get the same quality? But would it actually consume more time to do that? Like, I'm very interested in drip coffee, and
yeah. So in our shop we have espresso, we have drip, we have AeroPress, and we're waiting on some new technology to be pulled over the line at the moment, which will allow us to batch brew drip, really, really well. The problem is the technology hasn't been really up to scratch till kind of lately, at least by Marco anyway, and now it just about is. So we're actually going to implement having the batch brewed filter coffee, which, if everything stacks up the way they say it is, well then you should be able to have batch brewed coffee better than the pour over that the barista made, because it's programmed, it's more consistent, and making a pour over and a drip by hand, it's actually easier to get it wrong than it is to get it right, which is one of the reasons why it's so time consuming. So yeah, it's very possible now. They also have Marco have another brewer called The Brew, B-R-U. It's pretty new. Carl is using it in Coffee Angel to do fill flasks, puts it out by the door, people help themselves and they throw €2 into a cup. And I've tasted the coffee through that and it's pretty amazing. Yeah. So that, for a brew, it's only like €230. It's amazing. So yeah, it's there now, and really, I guess in all honesty, it's been the snobbery of people like me, you know, who've kind of steered away from that kind of stuff. But I'm like, listen, if it tastes great, I don't care what it is, you know, how it's been brewed, as long as we're selling coffee that tastes great.
The funny thing is, though, in seeing these batch brewers come out, which have got some great science behind them, again, Marco in there, we've got another job to go back and retrain the public away from the theatre of doing something like this, and then now going, hang on, look, we know like a year ago we told you batch brewing's no good. This is at the very top end of, say, speciality coffee. To actually now tell them, hey, actually, you know what we said there a year ago about batch brewers? Well, we've changed our mind about that now. It's actually working, it's good, you know. Technology's changed.
I just jump in on the roasting side, from a roaster side point of view there. You really have to understand how you're going to make your coffee when you're roasting it. You would roast coffee differently for a filter than you would for an espresso. You want the balance of the flavors is going to be different, and you will roast the coffee differently. You'll also let it rest for longer or shorter. For a roasted coffee, it should rest for an espresso for probably 2 to 3 days, depending on the coffee. Otherwise, it has too much acidity in it, and it will taste bitter, basically. You have to let it rest. For a filter coffee, it's more forgiving. You can use a filter coffee sooner after roasting it than you would for an espresso. You won't get the proper crema off it from an espresso.
Yeah, I was saying there before about how dynamic the coffee industry is. Certainly, you know what you're saying there about light roasting, say for filter, is one of those things that was being thrown around there for years. It always was, and it's generally true. But about 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years ago, people started experimenting with light roast in espresso, and it's funny, you know, because some people can do it. Some people can roast the right bean light for espresso. And there's a really big article, if you check out my Facebook page, Dodo, I reposted this article. I can't even remember the name of the British foodie who basically slandered, say, like Workshop. They're using a lot of. Do you remember what?
J Trainer, was it? Is it Trainer?
Rayner.
There you go. Yeah, that's it.
And he was dead right, you know. I think, you know, there is sometimes I think there's a trend, and people get on the bandwagon and they go, yeah, well, we'll light roast, and you know, because everyone else is light roasting, we'll try that.
Wagon of light roast. I mean, these beans they weren't roasted. They weren't. They were grassy. People took it to an absolute extreme, so that they thought light roast was like not finishing the roast. Yeah. It was so light that you couldn't develop any flavour, and it didn't get to a point where the flavours and the unique nuances from that bean were even coming out. It was just done enough.
It takes skill on the behalf of the roaster to source that sort of coffee right, and to roast it right, and to meticulously cup it and get it right. Because there's been some almighty sour coffees that I've had. And then you've got to have a barista who knows how to make that right, who knows the difference between putting in 18 grams and pulling out 36 mils of coffee from that 18 grams of coffee, or pulling out 30 or 40, and just getting that right recipe. It's and then also making sure that the espresso machine is operating at the optimal, what's it going to work at 92 degrees or 88 degrees? And is the pressure on the machine, if you've got a pressure profiler, you know, are we going to work at a constant 9 bar pressure, or are we going to, there's so many variables like that come into it. And not to mention, of course, the grind size and the temp pressure.
It's really complicated. So what would you do for somebody who's at home?
An AeroPress.
Yeah.
We have an AeroPress.
Yeah. Is that too complicated?
No, it's not complicated. No,
I mean, like, if you're going to get a home espresso machine, you're really going to have to invest in the guts of
1,500.
Yeah, 15. That's exactly the figure I had in mind.
Anything that you're buying less than that is not it's just not going to, it can't compare up to the commercial machines that you are used to drinking coffee from. So you're just going to be disappointed. I had this conversation with a friend of mine last week. She wanted to buy her husband an espresso machine for his birthday, and I said, would you have a cup? I said, are you going to spend that much money? She said, well, how much do I have to spend? I said, well, you know, probably 15, 1600 euros.
That's without the grinder.
Well, yes, well, I didn't,
well,
I
that's
didn't
the
throw
worst.
that
You
in.
tell
I
them
mean,
that much, and then they go, oh, sorry, it's another 500 euros for a grinder.
And I said, it's a big birthday, and she said, no, it's just an order. I said, well, let's talk Chemex with you or something else. We'll think about something else for you. But it's really hard to buy a machine at home that is going to produce an espresso of the same quality.
Yeah, I would forget about espresso at home unless you're going to spend a lot of money.
So would I.
But all the other coffee making pieces of equipment, from mocha pot through to French press,
So the scales.
the most important thing is a recipe, and for a recipe you need scales. So I love drinking coffee out of a mocha pot. It's a much more full-bodied way of making coffee. It's not typical to what we do in the shop at all.
Talk about the Biabeag, soaked up mocha pot.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, like, so there's a way of doing that right, you know? It's not straightforward, but I've had great coffee out of the French press. I've had a great coffee out of the AeroPress, you know.
There's nothing wrong with the French press if you use it right, you know? Water off the boil, correct recipe, you know? I think we're getting unanimous here.
So, you know, a scales and a stopwatch on your phone, you know, and it's just a recipe, you'll get a great cup of coffee if you have good beans, you know, so freshly ground. Grinder, scales.
Grinder and scales, really. That's if you're going to get anything to make good coffee at home. Grinder and scales.
Beans.
Fresh roasted beans from. Oh, actually, this is a point I really am passing to talk about. You know, there's this whole conversation about people go, oh, we've got all Irish produce in our cafe or our restaurant. I'm like, where's your coffee from? Oh, we've got some great Italian stuff here. I'm like, why can't you support a local roaster, you know, and value add to the Irish economy? We can't grow coffee in Ireland, you know, we just can't. But if you're going to go down that route of having an Irish menu and Irish produce, well then why not also go an Irish roasted coffee? You know, it's roasted locally. It's going to be fresh. You're going to be adding to the Irish economy, and you're probably also, if you've got a good roaster, he's going to roast and blend something that is relevant to the Irish palate. You know, we've got one blend there, the Blackwater blend, and it's pretty full bodied. You know, I know that Irish people generally, by and large, like a bit of sweetness in their coffee. Well, that's my reckoning on it.
I've had an experience picking up on that.
Yeah.
A 5-star hotel, myself and Brock talk about this from time to time. There's a 5-star hotel in the southeast, and they charge a lot of money for food and a hell of a lot of money for espresso. And I had the experience of going in there and paying, it's embarrassing to say how much I paid for a double espresso, served to me by someone who obviously hadn't a goddamn clue what they were doing, to the point where there's no point in going back and asking for a second one because they just repeat it all over again. It was too hot, it was just, everything was wrong about it. Ended up getting into a Twitter conversation with the general manager, ended up having a phone call with the general manager. And in a hotel which prides itself on its culinary delights and its positioning, found out that they had gone for illy coffee, which can be good, but in this case was mediocre beyond belief and phenomenally fucking expensive. Because illy would put in the machine and offer 24-hour call out. So they went for consistent mediocrity rather than good high-end coffee because it would have taken too much effort. And if they did that with any other part of their food and beverage service, they would have been slammed. And they're still doing it.
We used to say in Australia, don't let your customers leave with a bitter taste in their mouth. They go to so much effort and energy to make great food, but then no care or attention put into the coffee. In some respects, I do understand where, say, a lot of restaurants are coming from. They've got to pay a lot of money for an espresso machine. They've got high turnover of staff. To train someone to work as a barista, like we would do an upfront 3-hour training session, but we can't train experience into your staff. So, and then the margin, well, it's much, the margins on a glass of sherry are probably going to, and how you make and pour that, and you've got no machinery, it's going to be a lot easier. If I was a restaurant, what would I do if I was a restaurateur? And I would have, you go to France and you go to you go to Michelin star restaurants in let's say the continent. What do you think they use? Anyone know? Very simple, straightforward, it gets the recipe dead right every time, but it breaks the #1 rule of coffee. Nespresso. Yeah. The consistency is.
5 minutes without mentioning Nespresso.
The consistency is great. The formula is right, but the coffee is roasted in 260 kilo roasters, 12 of them back to back. How can they have great quality coffee coming in? And it's pre-ground.
I was roasting in notes there a couple of weeks ago, and a guy came in and got his espresso pods filled with notes coffee.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Nitro
point?
flushed and sealed.
Really?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And so ground kept alive. Apparently, I had never tasted it, but you know the guys in the roastery are saying, yeah, no, it's way better. You know, and it's consistent and repeatable. You know. But this is a little grinder. This is what I ground the coffee on. This is what I have at home, and when I'm not at home, this comes with me. An AeroPress and one of these just slots in there into your bag, and all you need is a bag of beans, and then you have amazing coffee at home and everywhere you go for €70. Scales, yeah. Scales is that size. Scales is just that size. And it's fantastic. You know, people are wanting to spend like €600 on a Gaggi espresso maker, and it's never going to make great coffee ever. You know, so I bring that on the plane. I can make coffee on the plane. Just ask for a I do, yeah. If I'm in a hotel, I just ask them to have a pot of hot water, and I make my own coffee. Yeah. You know, it's amazing.
It's true that like the AeroPress is it's very robust. You know, it goes everywhere. You don't need all the other gadgetry that comes with it. You just
it does come with the carrying case though.
Yeah. Sometimes.
Mine does.
No, they used to.
The ones we sell.
They do. Do they with the tote bag? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask, what do all three of you, hand on heart, first cup of the day in your own kitchen, how do you brew it?
AeroPress.
Espresso machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
he has an actual one.
No, I do filter. I do filter coffee.
But when my espresso machine broke down, it took me 6 months to get fixed. I was in no hurry to do it. You know, I've got the AeroPress and I've got V60, which is another kind of Chemex, which what Ferg's using here.
Yeah.
I have everything at home, but you know the kids love making coffee with the AeroPress in the morning as well, so they all want to press it. AeroPress
it brings up strong muscle.
Hmm?
You know, strong muscles.
Yeah, and it's the future of the family business. You know.
I saw photos of you.
Can I just ask about the farmers? Just I remember hearing something that they were saying, suggesting there might be a problem with monocropping. Farmers always growing beans on the same land over and over. Is that something you come across?
No, I haven't heard that. But I can imagine it would be. Yeah. Well, so the trees grow though. Like, look, I hear different stories about how old the trees are. The trees will crop every year, but then I have heard about older trees being pulled out of the ground and replanted. But
there's a lot of areas where the trees will really only last 8 to 10 years, and so they always have nurseries going. So they're always like starting off saplings, if you will. So they're always moving them. So I imagine that they'd be moving them around. They're replacing the dead ones, maybe not in the exact same spot, because most of these farms, you have to realize, are growing multiple crops at the same time on the same land. When I was in Indonesia, I was in Sumatra for a couple of weeks, and I visited a number of different farms around. And the first thing that shocked me was it wasn't just like fields and fields of coffee bushes. it was chili peppers and green beans and everything under the sun. I mean, in Indonesia, they have absolutely no worry about starving. They have fish, they have meat, they have cheese, they have anything you need to eat. They grow rice patties everywhere. So I imagine that they rotate the crops around, but because the coffee trees, the coffee bushes, only will last a certain amount of time, they probably have a plan to move them around. It's probably a lot of the educational programs that are being done through. It's one of the things that Fairtrade does add a lot of value, and the oats program does as well. Rainforest Lands. A lot of these programs are designed to help educate the farmers, so it's probably one of the things. I haven't come across it, but I imagine it's part of the education on, the crop rotations and moving them to different sites and so forth.
I have to give you a lot of credit for sticking it out with the Fair Trade organisation. When I came over here and I looked at Ireland, I'm like, oh my God, there's Fair Trade everywhere.
It was such a big marketing push. The problem is that this is the big argument I had, and I responded to something in the newspaper, and they printed what I responded in the newspaper. It was a few years ago now, where they were talking about how fair is fair trade, and I said, well, I don't think it really is. I said, as a small producer, it's not fair. It makes for an uneven playing field, because the large coffee producers, Bewley's for instance, has a much big marketing budget. They have a whole department, maybe a whole section of their building that just deals with fair trade. Most of us are accountants, maybe we're not allowed to be accountants anymore. but we wear so many hats. So to then also have to manage the fair trade process and pay the fees and all of the work that's involved in that, I felt that in order for us to compete for the consumers' loyalty to coffee, or to get them on to buy our coffee, we had to have a fair trade offering. But it was so expensive, and it took a huge amount of time, that the marketing, I felt that ironically, the fair trade marketing made it an unfair playing field for a small producer. If that makes any sense.
There's huge barriers to entry for small producers like us. They said to me that it has to get approved by Fair Trade Mark Ireland and Europe, and that every bag has to have the particular type of coffee that you've got that you're using stamped on the bag, and it has to be pre-printed. It can't be a sticker. And with a minimum print run of 25,000 bags, I was just like, that's impossible. So I rang Rainforest Alliance, and they said, oh sure, we track it all on computer via our head office in New York, who I was dealing with, and it's an incredibly streamlined organisation, very efficient. I wouldn't say it's policed as well as, say, Fair Trade, but it's very, very streamlined, and they often call it fairer than Fair Trade because Fair Trade is political, social. Rainforest Alliance is environmental, political and social. But one thing that always got me about fair trade coffee was, how can you walk into, as a green bean buyer, how can you look at the list of coffees there, and fair trade can often be right near the bottom in the cost of the coffees that you're buying. Where does all this extra money go for, you're looking at a green bean and it's 10 euros a kilo, and you're looking at, fair trade has a whole scale of coffees that are all over the place, but how can you look at something there and it's 2 euros a kilo green bean, or 3 euros, or whatever it is? To me, I saw that as they're not rewarding quality for profit, they're just maintaining an equilibrium, and there's no incentive there to actually get better. So a lot of the brokers that I deal with will pay a better margin for their coffee, for a more quality coffee, a more quality grown coffee, and to me that sort of a market is it's going to reward, it's going to be more sustainable in the long run. And actually when coffee prices did dip there, I can't remember when it was, there was, our broker said, listen, we're not going below a certain amount, because if we do, the farmers just won't be able to afford to live or exist. They'll rip out their coffee trees and they'll plant something else. They have to live, and that's just the way they do that. The coffee industry is certainly huge, you know, and we are really just the tip of the iceberg. The barista who makes a coffee in 30 seconds or a minute is it's the greatest potential to muck up a drink. It's had such a phenomenal journey before it gets to that point.
Thank you so much, Tree. It's 8:30, so I'm going to wrap up.